and welcome everyone to Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. I am your host, Nina Joshi. For today's episode, just wanted to run through a couple of quick announcements before I introduce our guest for today. We have our September symposium coming up. All of that information will be in the chat, so make sure that you join at the end of the month. We also have our Innovator Summit in the fall, which will be in November, and all of that information will also be in the chat. And as always, if you are interested in sponsoring a HITLAB discussion or event, including Women's Health Tech Wednesdays, all of that information is also available in the chat or in the QR code. And so with that, would like to formally bring on our guest today, Joanna Sickler, who is the Vice President of Health Policy and External Affairs at Roche. As you know, we love questions here at Women's Health Tech Wednesdays. So if you have any for Joanna during the conversation, please use the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and I will make sure that we get to it. So with that, I would like to formally bring on Joanna. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Nina.
Of course. Well, would love if maybe we can kick things off by having you introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of a background.
Yeah, and hello to everybody out there virtually. I'm Joanna Sickler. As Nina said, I'm currently the Vice President of Health Policy and External Affairs at Roche Diagnostics. I've spent my career focused on technology introduction to solve public health problems, and over time have become more and more interested specifically in implementation science and how we sort of bridge the gap from theory to practice, which, as I learned early in my career, is a significant one when we think about technology. I've been with Roche for the last 8 years. Prior to that, I had been working in global health for many years, both on the NGO side and then also in the startup context, focused on development for LMICs. And I've also spent some time in the pharmaceutical industry as well. My career has spanned business, access, medical, and policy roles. So I've always sort of circled around these different functions and have just looked for ways and opportunities where I felt I could really have an impact.
That is absolutely incredible. And when it comes to the, your career, like you mentioned, that really goes across multiple industries, was kind of this realm, this public health plus tech, like, was this something that you knew you wanted to be a part of? How did you kind of, come to be where you are right now? Can you walk us through that journey a little bit?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. There was no master plan. I think that I do have an MBA and I took a lot of marketing classes, so I've gotten very good at packaging the story. That doesn't necessarily mean there was always a plan. So I think for myself, I've always just been driven by listening to my gut and what interests me and what excites me. And that sort of taken me on the journey through, getting involved in the pharmaceutical industry, then jumping over to diagnostics as I saw the impact diagnostics could have for public health, and looking at different types of opportunities. And then I've sort of just looked at it and recognized that, those summary themes I mentioned up front really are the core of me and what drives me and what sort of helped me make decisions. And I will say as well that, throughout my career, you obviously have a lot of development conversations where you're sort of told the boxes you need to check to get from point A to point B. And I have ignored those boxes pretty much every juncture.
That's absolutely incredible. And I think that's sometimes the way you have to do it. I really wanted to ask you too. I mean, I know that you are really, really passionate about kind of health equity and inclusion, and of course the work that you do really within the policy and public health space, I would imagine, kind of have allowed you to play a role in that. But can you share with us some specific examples in where you've really seen attention, proper attention, meaningful attention, and execution, and kind of how that can really drive impact? Are there any specific stories that come to mind or examples that you could share with us?
Well, I mean, this is I'm going to use a real big macro example, but as somebody who's been part of this and on the sidelines of this for 20 years, I mean, look at where we're at with HIV treatment globally. I mean, I worked in this field when it felt impossible.
Wow.
When you would be in Africa and say, there's no way. It is literally impossible to treat, to diagnose, to do any of these things. And look at where we're at today. We have countries achieving 95, 95, 95. And for me, I think one of the benefits of sort of being mid-career is having that perspective, because I know that when I was earlier in my career, it was sort of, it wasn't happening now, it wasn't going to happen. And I think 20 years in now, I see more that like oftentimes if we can just incrementally keep moving in the right direction over time, we actually get to a pretty impressive place.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really great example to kind of really show that like sometimes baby steps are still steps. So absolutely. And I also kind of wanted to ask you, I think really when we think about a lot of these kind of the attention being given, I would say, probably in general, but I would say more specifically around, health equity, inclusion, all of those types of things. How, can you share with us a couple of strategies or tools that organizations can use to really ensure that they're actively, not only promoting it, but implementing it as well? What does that kind of really look like from your experience, I would say, just in working in all of these different industries?
Yeah. So this is something that I feel really passionately about. And I think the first thing I would say is that an organization needs to play the long game. This isn't going to happen overnight. And it needs to be something that where there's true organizational commitment to, again, change over time. And a couple of things in particular that I would call out is education around unconscious bias in the workplace, because every single person has unconscious bias. This is something that is universal. And I think recognition of that and how, particularly as leaders, this impacts our perceptions of people and who we hire is a really critical piece of the puzzle. Definitely. I also think another really meaningful thing is really taking a step back and looking at job descriptions and asking hard questions about the minimum requirements. I think job descriptions are something that oftentimes, right, they just keep getting passed along, and nobody even looks at that section. And I mean, all the way from things like requiring a bachelor's degree. Do you really need a bachelor's degree to do this job? Because that's a pretty significant socioeconomic barrier for a lot of people. All the way up to, another thing I see really commonly in the industry I'm in is you need to have X years of experience in this industry in order to do this job. Well, that creates a pretty significant barrier if we're trying to have more inclusive policies. And I think we need to take a step back and just ask the question, is that really true?
Absolutely. I think that that's really meaningful. And I would imagine, I think, especially, I would say through kind of all stages of career, from early to later stage of your career, really being able to have those opportunities, I think is so important. And I really like how you're kind of thinking more macros and organizational, but even just when we take a specific slice of it, which is just hiring in and of itself, there's so much work that can be done. So I really like that you kind of called that out a little bit. You had also mentioned a little bit kind of earlier during your, your journey, a lot of the work that you did from NGOs and startups and kind of really running the gamut. Would love if you could share a little bit more about, any of the insights that you've gleaned from your work with NGOs and even in the startup space that have kind of led you to where you are right now. Is there anything, any lessons learned from those chapters of your life?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that I always reflect on now, being part of one of the largest multinational healthcare companies in the world and having had the experience of working at an NGO or working in a 40-person company, is I think it makes me really scrappy, and it makes me really open to the idea of, oh, well, we don't have budget for that, so we can't do it. I'm like, no, we can figure it out. Yeah. Because you know what, we have a lot of resources at this company. So I think I just have a fundamentally different orientation when it comes to these types of conversations, because I've spent so much time in organizations where the reality always was, we have this much resource and we have this much to do, and we got to figure it out. And I think that that's something that actually a lot of larger organizations can be well served through applying to the way they work.
That is very, very, very true. I think scrappiness is I think it transcends everything. So I absolutely love that. That's amazing. And when we kind of explore a little bit more around, the health policy kind of side of who you are, for you, when you think about, I would say even in just what we're seeing right now with all of these very, very real impacts of policy to our health, kind of what is your kind of take on it? What are you kind of seeing in the environment, and how is that impacting the work that you're currently doing right now at Roche?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very eventful couple of years. With, I think that being particularly not just in public health, but at a diagnostic company during the pandemic, where we
Oh,
really saw diagnostics
absolutely.
elevated in the global conversation in the new way. Suddenly, people in global health want to talk about vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics. We were not
Yeah.
there 5 years ago. I was sort of a lone wolf that thought diagnostics were important. It sometimes felt like. So I think that that's been a very positive thing. But I think on the flip side, the ongoing challenge with healthcare is, this feeling that it just keeps costing more and more money, right? And how we start figuring out what are the strategic investments to be made to really improve population health. How do we start looking at that through the lens of it as an investment to make a population healthy, which then leads to productivity and a lot of other really positive things? And how we do that in what is increasingly, a more challenging time economically, right? So those are
Absolutely.
some of the things that we're really reflecting on. And I think in particular, diagnostics are a great investment. If we can screen, if we can catch disease early, we can fundamentally change the course of that disease, which both benefits that person, but also lowers costs to the healthcare system. And I think being more big picture about tackling that is probably our biggest policy challenge, because most of these decisions, whether you're talking about an individual hospital or whether you're talking about a national government, tend to be made in silos.
100%. And I really wanted to more of a random and specific question that I have for you when you're talking about diagnostics.
Yeah.
I'm so curious because I know, at least for me, I'm just seeing like the proliferation of at-home testing. I think COVID was a great catalyst for a lot of that. And now we're seeing it for, a slew of other conditions or just health markers, et cetera. For you, have you seen, I think, when we think about at-home testing, the convenience aspect, maybe affordability, but it still requires stable internet for, a tech platform. There's still some steps that's needed on behalf of the patient. Have you kind of seen any particular challenges or barriers or just things to look for as companies start exploring, at home, just to really ensure that they're thinking and designing for equity in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think that at-home testing is really exciting. And I also think too, we need to recognize that at-home testing can be like a range of things, right? It can be what we're all used to with, a rapid antigen test for COVID, which I think probably everybody has touched over the past couple of years. But I mean, another thing I would bring up is self-sampling and home sampling and being to mail in samples, which I would also put in the category of home testing, right?
Absolutely.
You can do that for things like cervical cancer screening now. And I think those are a lot of the opportunities that are really the most exciting to open up access. And one of the things we've also seen, I think, as a result of the pandemic is, during the pandemic, healthcare wasn't happening in general, right? Because people were afraid and in some cases were afraid, but in some cases were actively told to not go for a regular primary care appointment, to not do your regular screening. And I think what this has opened up, though, is much more openness and acceptability of the idea that we would do screening in this way, that maybe it isn't locked into a physician appointment. Certain organizations like Kaiser have actually been doing things like this for a long time. And so I think really thinking broadly about how we increase access through these types of mechanisms is a really exciting frontier.
Absolutely. And it really is kind of this, low hanging fruit, because I also know some folks through my work that where there is a lot of, anxiety, just generalized anxiety when it comes to testing or hospitals and a lot of that. So being able to alleviate some of those barriers, I would definitely agree is very, very exciting. Also kind of wanted to ask, I know, when we tend to think about diagnostics, it's really, thinking about specific conditions you're testing for, specific, diseases, et cetera. Kind of curious to get your insight on, have you seen with COVID, I think a lot of people have become just more generally health conscious of I need to live my best health life. Have you kind of seen an increased demand for those types of more like curated, bespoke, hormone panel, blood panel? Like, I just want to know my current state of health. Have you kind of seen that through your work?
I don't know that I've seen that as much because honestly, we tend to be really focused on closing the gap for a lot of the basic things that, frankly, we're still not seeing most people around the world have access to, right? I mean, globally, 81% of people do not have access to diagnostics, 47% in high income countries. This gap is very, very, very significant. So I do think that we tend to be focused more on some of these like bread and butter screening tests of like, let's ensure people are getting screened for hepatitis and HPV to prevent cancer. Let's, look at people getting appropriate screenings to prevent heart failure. We tend to be more focused sort of in that niche to where we grow out from. But that said, I think different health systems are always in different places. And it's so exciting to see these things incubated in current places because that then becomes the next frontier.
Absolutely, 100%. And that stat about how there's still that huge discrepancy in terms of people even getting, those routine diagnostics. That is shocking to me. I did not know that number was so high. That's so for you. I mean, now my next question, because I'm so curious, what are some ways where, I mean, when we think about the barrier, why that's kind of happening, is that more of just an education? Is that a stigma? What are some of the things that you're seeing and how does one, help combat that, whether that's education, outreach, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question, and I think it's really multifaceted.
We're going to solve it right now.
A couple of things I would throw out there is the fact that historically diagnostics have not been valued. It goes back to what I was saying about the fact that we're always talking about vaccines and therapeutics, and we're never talking about diagnostics. We are now moving into a space where we are seeing people talk about access to diagnostics as a core piece of universal healthcare. That was not true 5 years ago. We saw insurance schemes all the time that did not include coverage for diagnostics. So you're talking about how do we enable access to therapeutics without the diagnostics that would actually enable you to triage people to the correct therapy. Absolutely. So I think there's been just a real awareness gap. I think that one opportunity out of the pandemic is that that's been closed. Everyone knows what PCR is now. As somebody who's working on PCR for 8 years, that was pretty exciting.
Welcome to my world.
So I think it's that. And then I think the other piece too is what I was alluding to earlier about really thinking about when we think about health, where's the best investment for impact and how we start to shift again from a system focused on treating sick people to a system focused on keeping people healthy, which I think is a fundamental challenge of every health system, whether you're talking about the US, Europe, or you're in Africa or Asia. Like this is the challenge, right? Not having the healthcare system be reactive to illness, but be proactive to detect things early and change the course of disease.
I 100% agree. And I really love how you kind of speak to this paradigm shift that's really needed to be able to, ramp up and really accelerate all of the amazing work that you're doing and that I think collectively so many folks are doing to, to alleviate a lot of these issues. And I also kind of wanted to ask a little bit, kind of knowing your public health background. I know public health, you tend to think very, very macro at a population level, whereas in a private sector, you're really drilled down to a specific product line or platform. For you, you're kind of thinking in both altitudes. How do those different kind of scopes of work, how does that kind of come together to be harmonized to create meaningful impact?
Yeah. So, I mean, in my career, I have been at certain junctures very product focused, right? Where I was specifically working on the development of a specific product. I was specifically working on the introduction of a specific product. As you said, in my current role, global policy, I sit fully above product. And I really think about things on a macro health system and disease state lens. And frankly, I actually really love it. It's really nice to do that. And to your point, it very much aligns with public health. So I think one of the benefits of being part of a large organization like I am is there are lots of people who are product focused. And what I try to do is really come in to bring that bigger picture perspective, though, of like what needs to ultimately happen in the health system to have all of these things that we are investing in developing actually impact people's lives. Because that's like the biggest gap I've seen having been involved in technology development, right? Like it's one thing to make something in a lab, it's one thing to like sit at work, but like bridging that gap from what something could theoretically do to actually getting it integrated into care, it's a big gap. And it's something that we don't spend enough time focused on.
Absolutely. Yeah, things all work in a vacuum. I wholeheartedly agree. And I also want to make sure we're getting some really, really great questions in. And before I just, talk to you just and blow through our 30 minutes together, I want to make sure that we definitely get through some of the questions that we have from the audience. So I'll kind of start kind of towards the top. So our first question that we have from one of our audience members is, what role does collaboration play in your experience?
I mean, I think collaboration is everything. I mean, whether it's talking about the work that we do externally, collaborating with, other companies, other NGOs, other academia. I mean, I think collaboration and figuring out how we can put our individual needs aside and see the bigger picture and all move in the same direction is critical. And then I think if we think about it more in a micro way, I've been parts of organizations that were heavily matrixed and cross-functional, and that can definitely be frustrating, but it can also be some of the most rewarding collaboration experiences you ever have.
Absolutely. I love that. Our next question is, what changes can occur in larger companies to make big picture more relevant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important question. I mean, I think what I'll say is I think it does come down to delineations of roles and responsibilities and where those things are in an organizational structure, right? So, I mean, I think if you want an organization to consider big picture things, you need to have people who are incentivized to focus on big picture things, who are in influential places in the organization. I mean, I think in my experience, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what are people incentivized to do? And so I think you really need to be thoughtful about not just what you say, but structurally what you're doing to sort of drive the behaviors that you want.
Absolutely. I love that. And we have another question, which is, how are you using education to generate doctor physician support?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time? It cut out.
Yeah, of course. How are you using education to generate doctor support? So probably for getting their buy-in when we think about diagnostics.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that close to that anymore. I don't work in a medical role anymore. But I mean, I think what I would say from previous experiences that I've had is like definitely engaging clinicians directly for feedback throughout, whether you're talking about a development process, whether you're talking about a product launch, is a really key piece of the puzzle. And the most important piece of the puzzle is not just curating subconsciously for the people who say what you want to hear. Because let me tell you, it's super easy to put together a panel of people that validate everything you think. So I think having a lot of awareness, particularly about how you're selecting people, and also creating an environment where people feel comfortable saying what they actually think is really key to the process.
That is a really, really, really great insight. Absolutely agree. Our next question is, in terms of health equity and filling gaps in care, can you speak to Roche's investment in diagnostic policy as well as product development in the US or globally?
Yeah, so I mean, we're a global organization. We're present. I mean, I don't think we're present on Antarctica, but I think we're present everywhere else very actively. And we've been, I think our portfolio is really broad, and we're just very focused, as I said, on thinking about how we work with national health systems to think about getting diagnostics integrated into care, whether we're looking at sort of, next generation, advanced diagnostics for cancer diagnosis, or as I said before, we're in Africa thinking about, okay, you have HIV viral load systems that are all throughout the continent. Those same instruments run TB, they run HPV, they run hepatitis, they run COVID, right? How do we leverage this to expand access? I mean, and we're thinking about that opportunistically at every step of the chain.
100%. And also wanted to, from that same participant member, wanted to ask kind of around the Roche investment in digital therapeutics. Is there kind of anything that you can speak to when we think about like digital therapeutic policy and kind of how that is coming together with product dev for Roche? Yeah,
I mean, definitely that's in our portfolio, and it's something that we do work on. I'm going to be completely candid. It's not my expertise. There's somebody on my team that works very closely on that. So I'm actually going to not answer the question incorrectly, but
no
provide more details offline.
No problem. I know, in kind of as you were kind of explaining one of the most recent questions, you were kind of speaking to the work that you're doing for diagnostics kind of within the cancer space. Are there any other kind of areas of priority for Roche right now when we kind of think about diagnostics? I know you mentioned, are there any other disease states or populations that are kind of interest right now? I
mean, I think our three areas where we're very focused are, as you mentioned, oncology,
Mhm.
Also infectious disease. And I actually mentioned several areas where infectious disease and oncology overlap in ways people
Mhm.
don't fully understand, because there are a
Yeah.
number of viruses that do cause cancer and people still don't fully understand those linkages. So those things can actually be connected. When we say, and non-communicable diseases, there's some gray area diseases actually.
Absolutely.
And then also cardiovascular disease is a huge
Ah,
focus for us.
interesting. Gotcha. So those are kind of the big three for 2023 and beyond.
Yeah.
Awesome. And now kind of wanted to ask you a little bit as we transition, just so kind of curious when we think about, careers and journeys and really, imparting the wisdom. I think you have such a wealth of experience and knowledge kind of, with public policy, public health, just the full gamut. And so for you, do you have any words of advice for people that are starting off in their career that are, here today, hearing what you do and saying, wow, I want to do that too. Anything that you can kind of speak to that has kind of helped you as you've navigated what you want to do, with your career, or as you've been progressed and moved up?
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I think what I would say is what I mentioned earlier, that there's no magic formula, but I think the guiding principles that have really helped me in my career are, first, pursuing things that I'm passionate and excited about, because if I'm excited about it, I'm going to do a better job doing it. I think secondly, really building relationships with strong mentors throughout my career and looking for those people, and also recognizing that, I've had mentors that look many different ways, right? So I think particularly, as like a feminist lesbian, I think everyone assumes like those must have been my mentors, but I've had many amazing male mentors that have supported me and helped me in my career. And so using your own instincts though to figure out who those people are that can really help you and give you good advice, because not all advice is good. And then I think that the third piece is just, knowing yourself, and knowing what you want to do and what works for you and doesn't. And you have to be flexible. I always say, I always have an idea in my head of where I'm trying to go over the next 10 years, and that helps me go over here.
I love that.
Like, I never end up there, but I'm trying to go there, and I end up somewhere I like more.
That I'm gonna take that with me. That's amazing. That's great advice. Thank you so much for all of your time today, Joanna. It was such an incredible discussion. It's gotten me very excited about the world of diagnostics, and I can't wait to see, where it all takes us. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Nina. It's really been a pleasure to be here with all of you.